The man is coming out. He's got a black stocking on his head. He's got 3 duffel bags, apparently full with money. The bomb has gone off. A bomb has gone off. He's been shot.
In 1983, W5 investigated the then 10-year-old mystery of who was the Kenora bomber, a robbery captured on live radio.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's an experience which not many people wish to go through again.
A man who successfully left the bank with an estimated $100,000 in duffel bags and was then shot and blown up by a bomb he was wearing, sending body parts and singed money into the sky.
Ladies and gentlemen, that ends this broadcast on the attempted bank robbery from the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, a live broadcast and one which we hope we never have to do again. This is Chris Paulson for John Barry.
A coroner's jury concluded the police officer was justified in shooting the bomber. The final and daunting recommendation of the jury was that the investigation continue to prove the identity of the bank robber.
We were hoping when we got the paper, what's his name? What's his name?
Barb Manson was a teenage witness. Now she's a Kenora City Councillor who has tracked the case for 50 years.
And I was right here.
Following the explosion, you were doing anything you could to collect information on what had happened.
Yes, because I was there. I was a part of it. I wanted to see what the newspaper was going to say.
So what do we have here?
Friday, May 11th.
Bank robber disintegrates in a dynamite explosion.
Yeah.
When you read that headline,
You feel it. You feel that explosion.
when you see this photo,
It's heartbreaking. I wanted to keep those memories of what I saw, what I heard, what I felt, and to know the rest of the story.
was this town's, wasn't just you starving for information.
Oh, no, the whole town wanted to know.
Did you ever think you'd be sitting here 50 years later still wondering?
No, I thought they would know within a year. I thought there would be tons of information about this guy. So they've got a face, they've got prints, they've got everything, so they should know who he is. Composite sketch, the inquiry, like nothing. Who was this guy?
Her newspaper collection grew over the years, but the case grew cold.
I'm Bill Cunningham.
A decade after the explosion, W5 first investigated. Around the same time, the last bit of evidence was found.
10 years later, almost to the day, this torn and twisted piece of metal was found by workmen as they demolished a building.
The workers had found one of the guns the robber had on him. It had been thrown onto a roof 2 blocks away.
When it was found, it still had a round in the chamber, and it triggered the memory of Kenora's own Dog Day afternoon.
10 years turned into 30, and then police thought they had a break in the case due to a technology still considered rather new, DNA testing. In 2002, the Kenora police chief said he found a piece of the bomber's hair in evidence. At the time, a missing man from British Columbia matched the bomber's description. The chief convinced the man's brother to volunteer a DNA sample for comparison. The conclusion? They didn't match. The missing man turned up alive and well in France. Nowadays, there are millions of DNA samples to compare with, and DNA technology is much better. But there's one problem.
There's lots of people who are saying to me almost on a weekly basis, well, why aren't they testing the DNA?
Author and witness Joe Ralco wrote a book about the bombing.
Well, the answer is because they don't have any hair samples because they don't know where it is anymore. Because Kenora Police closed and the OPP don't have it.
Kenora Police were taken over by the Ontario Provincial Police in 2009. We asked the OPP to show us any physical evidence they might have. They said there was no physical box on a shelf and all material is stored digitally. The only thing they could show us were photos. But there is one last place in the world there is bound to be physical evidence of the bomber and even DNA.
Years after the incident at the bank, you began working here.
Yeah, I worked for the city of Kenora, and the job I took was called the cemeterian.
What did you do as a cemeterian?
I looked after the records and I made arrangements for internments. And I also did cemetery tours.
Tours?
Yes, they were night tours, and they were called A Walk on the Dark Side.
Before she was a city councillor, Barb Manson guided those tours of the Lake of the Woods Cemetery on the outskirts of town. This is where the unknown bomber is buried in an unmarked grave, and the tours became a bit of a tourist attraction, and Barb, the lead performer.
So the bank robber was part of your tour here in the cemetery?
The bank robber was part of the tour. Because I was there the day it happened, I could relate how I felt and what I saw that day. During the tour, we'd walk in this area, and I would say that the bank robber was, what was left of him was put in our cemetery in an unmarked grave.
So right around here in an unmarked grave?
In this area, yep.
Then something remarkable happened after one of her tours, something she thought police should know about.
It was weeks after the tour, I got a letter from a lady that was on the tour, and she said she knew who the bank robber was.
What did the letter say that you received?
I enjoyed your tour. I know who the bank robber is. If you want to know, contact me. And she gave her contact information. And she was actually from overseas. So right away I informed the police. The police took the letter. They researched it. They came back and they told me that it was a dead end.
The bomber's grave may be unmarked, but W5 has confirmed that the cemetery does have a map of exactly where it is. Nobody knows exactly what is in the grave, but if there's anything there, it's the most likely place to find DNA of the Kenora bomber.
I think it would bring closure to the whole episode, to know who he was and what his background was and why he did what he did.
Do you think there's some value in perhaps doing a new updated DNA test?
It would be interesting to see where that went.
There have been lots of high-profile cases of disinterments that have led to positive identifications. Montreal police, with the help of the FBI and local police in West Virginia, dug up this grave in the spring of 2022. They were looking to identify a suspect in the murder of Montreal teenager Sharon Pryor back in 1975. Despite the man being in the grave for 4 decades, forensic scientists were able to extract usable DNA that identified the murderer.
If I was to touch this table right beside me, you could get a DNA sample.
Absolutely. Our techniques now are so sensitive.
Nicole Navrosky is a forensic biologist and assistant professor of forensic genetics at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. She's an expert on DNA testing.
If there are remains, bones, buried in an unmarked grave that was disinterred, how likely is it that you could pull a usable sample?
So that's a tricky question because it's really going to depend on the condition of the remains. Sometimes it's incredibly remarkable what we can do with a very small biological sample in terms of generating some information.
How far have we come today when it comes to identifying the dead?
When you have remains where you have bones or teeth, typically we can recover some of that mitochondrial DNA because of its abundance and generate a profile. And we can utilize degraded DNA samples, very old DNA samples. We're gaining substantially more information from a sample than we used to be able to do. And we can utilize all of that information for comparison to a family reference sample or anything that we might have to make that potential identity.
When it comes to the Kenora bomber, if we were able to get a good sample, are you confident that we could identify who that individual was?
It's going to depend on the condition of those remains, but if there is sufficient sample, then I believe that you would be able to use genealogical methods to potentially elucidate a person of interest.
These days, online services that police use, such as GEDmatch and private companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com, mean tens of millions of people have voluntarily given samples of their DNA. That means the odds of finding a match for the bomber have never been higher.
Considering the advancements of genetic genealogy, should we be able to identify the Kenora bomber?
In theory, yes. Assuming that the database, such as GEDmatch or another similar database, has some distant relatives that could potentially match the person of interest. It really will depend, again, who's in the database, who is searchable, and how much DNA is shared between your person of interest, so the Kenora bomber's sample, versus who is in the database.
This is the cemetery. This is where he's buried.
X marks the spot.
One way to get that sample, dig up the body. But how do you do that? Executive producer Derek Miller and I sifted through the options.
Question is, how do you disinter a body? Well, I contacted the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, which I'd never heard of before. And they tell me that if you want to dig up a body, generally speaking, you need to get a court order. So hire a lawyer, bring it to court.
That sounds like it could be expensive.
Expensive and time-consuming, and no guarantee that it will work unless the judge agrees with you. So I pulled up the Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act, and way down in section 102, they talk about disinterments. And 3 ways to disinter a body. The first one, like I mentioned, get a court order. The second one is the Attorney General or the Solicitor General, for the purposes of a criminal investigation, can order a disinterment.
That could be tied up in bureaucracy.
Yeah. So then you're dealing with bureaucrats, you're dealing with perhaps politicians.
Yeah.
And again, I think they might just tell us to get a lawyer and ask for a court order. They might do the same thing, right?
Back at square one.
But there's a third way as well. The coroner can order a disinterment for the purpose of a coroner's investigation. So that kind of sounds like the way to go, I think.
Sounds like a decent possibility.
Let's ask the coroner. First thing he can say is no.
So we sent this request to the Chief Coroner of Ontario, asking him to consider disinterring the Kenora bomber. Dr. Dirk Heyer didn't know the case, so he pulled the file and did his own digging. 5 months later, and he met with the Ontario Provincial Police and the Crown Attorney in Kenora. Finally, he agreed to be interviewed by W5.
Up next,
The unknown gunman is buried here in an unmarked grave.
roadblocks to a decades-old cold case.
50 years later, and this is now again an active investigation.
Yes. When W5 continues.
There's a helicopter overhead. The man is coming out.
It's been 5 decades since a mystery masked robber walked into a Kenora, Ontario bank and walked out with $100,000. But his getaway was cut short.
The bomb has gone off.
The bank robber is lying, and we would well and truly suppose that he is dead.
The name he registered at the local hotel was fake. The address doesn't even exist. A trunk in his hotel room, which may have contained clues, was blown up by a bomb squad. Somebody went missing from the face of the earth in May 1973, and to this day, nobody has come forward to claim his body.
The unknown gunman is buried here, unmourned in an unmarked grave. The crime was solved by his own death. But the mystery endures. Who was he? Where did he come from? Does anyone miss him or grieve his loss? And what drove him to such a desperate gamble and such a sorry end?
If a case is not an active investigation, could you yourself move forward with a disinterment?
Yes, and we do.
Dr. Dirk Heyer is Ontario's chief coroner. He has ordered recent disinterments that have led to positive DNA matches, even for very old cold cases.
In May 1975, a farmer in Castleman, Ontario, found the body of a woman floating in the Nation River.
That body remained unidentified until summer 2023. Dr. Heyer ordered a disinterment that helped identify the Nation River lady as murder victim Jewel Langford, 45 years after she was buried. And in 2021, Dr. Heyer ordered the exhumation of a Leamington, Ontario body. Even though the body had been in the ground for more than 50 years, scientists were able to extract usable DNA. And so W5 asked Dr. Heyer to review the Kenora bomber case and consider a disinterment to extract DNA.
We asked you to look into disinterring the remains. What happened next?
When it came to my attention through W5, it's something that I, as the chief coroner, have taken steps to understand, to learn about the case. I look into the background, look at the file that we may have, look at if there's any other investigators involved.
And then a surprise. He found out there were other investigators involved.
The investigation, from what I understand from the Ontario Provincial Police, is this is an active and ongoing investigation.
50 years later, and this is now again an active investigation.
Yes.
W5 contacted the Ontario Provincial Police for an explanation, and were told that because of the 50th anniversary of the unsolved case, that officers have been assigned to review the case files, talk to the Crown Attorney, and a regional coroner. And that affects what the chief coroner can do.
When a case is active, what does that mean for you?
We would stand back while the investigation occurs to ensure that we don't impact the integrity of a criminal investigation or a criminal justice system process.
Can police perform a disinterment without the chief coroner?
Yes.
But that does not seem to be the plan. In this statement, a police spokesperson wrote, "The OPP, using a victim-centered approach, must place emphasis in allocating costly investigative resources on cases in which a DNA match can bring a measure of comfort and resolution to a victim's family and friends." The answer seems to be, since the bomber has no known family or friends to bring comfort to, identifying him is not on the agenda.
Would you like to see this solved?
Would this case, as I understand it, be of interest to many? The answer is yes.
And then a last-minute twist.
After 7 months of questions to the OPP about whether they would disinter the body to retrieve DNA, they deliver a bombshell. There actually is a sample, and it's being stored at the Center of Forensic Sciences right here in Toronto. According to this email, enough DNA for comparison and disinterring the remains isn't necessary. Now, whether or not a search for a match happens is still under review.
Which means the unknown bomber will remain under 6 feet of Kenora dirt, and at least for now, leaving the mystery intact for the storytellers.
And I really appreciate the opportunity of returning to Kenora to talk about the 2 favorite subjects in my life, the Kenora bomber and me.
At Kenora's museum, author Joe Ralco marks the anniversary, telling the story that everybody in the packed house already knows.
There was no crowd control. There was no police officer that came up and said, "Leave the scene, the bank's being robbed." And I think the reason they didn't say that was they didn't know what to do. They were making it up as they went along.
Joe's book about the unknown bomber has no photos, but hundreds of them were on display at the exhibit next door. And though every picture is worth 1,000 words, this is one mystery with 1,000 questions.
It still boggles my mind to think, why Kenora? How did he pick Kenora, and what was he trying to do? Was it a failed robbery, or did he come here purposely to commit suicide by cop?
Who was he?
Paul Higgins of 435 Glen Drive, Toronto, is what we have. 50 years later, and he's still unknown.
We've posted W5's original 1983 documentary on our official YouTube channel. It's just 10 minutes, so it's an easy watch, and the story even has the original commercials.
Andrew Knisley and Jody Middick are competing in one of the world's toughest rally races.
Back in 2010, W5 followed the 2 soldiers as they raced through the streets of Newfoundland with Soldier On, a charity supporting injured Canadian Forces members and vets through sport.
Jody and Andrew are severe underdogs, not just because they're amateurs, Jody is missing 2 legs, and Andrew's missing a leg and part of an arm. Ricky and Julian from the Trailer Park Boys are also competing, and they've become fast friends with the soldiers.
I can't believe you guys passed the breathalyzer this morning. Yeah, no kidding. Nice work.
The Trailer Park Boys get mobbed at every stop for autographs, but Jody and Andrew are also signing their fair share, and even better, people are giving them autographed checks for the Soldier On cause.
You did incredibly well. What does that mean? What kind of a message does that send?
Well, it shows what Soldier On is all about. The recovery that's possible and just pushing it to the limit, you know, getting that fire back in the belly.
You can watch that entire story and all of our new documentaries on our official YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe. I'm Avery Haynes. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.